what he did in Vietnam. And as our newsletter went out, the year of 1965 was the first big year of heavy ground battle in Vietnam. And Jim was there for that. And many of you who were not alive at that time don't remember a lot of the details. He's going to give them to you. He has an excellent PowerPoint presentation. And let us also have all the Marine Corps veterans in here. Please stand up. How many Marines are with us? Got a few. How many of you served in Vietnam with the Army? Will you stand up? Anybody else? Any branch of service? Army?
Any branch?
Maybe any branch. Air Force? Without further ado, let's welcome Jim Councillor. Jim, the evening is yours. Come on up to our mic.
Thank you.
Let's have a good hand for him, please.
Get this situated here and not step on my glasses, which would be not good. Well, thank you, Ken. Closer? This good? Now, my wife would disagree. She keeps telling me I'll never need a mic as loud and as much as I talk. I will tell you, to echo what Ken said, this was a relatively difficult presentation to put together. Occupationally, I've done hundreds of these, but I've never publicly talked about my journey in the Marine Corps and my journey in Vietnam. So putting this together kind of at the behest of one of my fellow Rotarians was something I was willing to do for a reason I'll explain later on in the presentation itself. But in doing so, what I found I needed to do was just kind of make it a litany, a linear timeline of exactly what my journey really was. And that's what we're going to do tonight, with your permission. So next slide. What I thought I'd start with is kind of giving you the background of where I came from. I'm Milwaukee born and bred, parochial school kid from Milwaukee, Mount Calvary on 53rd and Keefe, and then Milwaukee Lutheran, which is out on 97th and Grand Tosa. We were the poor Lutherans in the valley. We had Divine Savior on this end, the poor kids in the valley, and then the Greek Orthodox Church on the other side. But I had graduated from there under a program that allowed me to graduate high school 30 days after my 16th birthday. Got out early, immature. I would never do that to one of my kids because it really didn't benefit me socially or maturity-wise, and I'll explain what that's all about. Applied for 2 years at 2 different colleges, University of Wisconsin in Madison and Chicago University. University of Chicago was the toughest one to get into. I went there for 2 years, but my dad had said, there's no way at your age you're going to go down and live in Chicago on your own. So I literally had to take a railroad that is no longer in existence. Some of you might have been around here long enough, you remember the Northwestern line, which used to be a station right down by the lake. North Shore, that went between Milwaukee and Chicago. And he insisted that I sat there and took that down for my classes in Chicago and lived at home. So I did that for 2 years. And I sat there and came back after my sophomore year, and my dad said, well, you're supposed to declare a major. You go back your next year, what are you going to declare? And my academic advisor had suggested I take political science. I had no idea, no intention to do that. I was way too immature to do that. But as probably some of my relatives here will mention, I have a tendency to be a little bit of a smart aleck. And my dad had no sense of humor. But I told him that if I went back, I was going to major in beer, which he did not find funny. But he did ask me what I felt strongly about. And I said, what I feel strongly about is the war in Vietnam. My idols at the time were JFK, Martin Luther King. So he says, well, if you feel strongly about that, what are you going to do? I said, I already have. I've enlisted in the Marine Corps. At which time my mother kept on referencing why God had cursed her. I don't know what that was all about. But we went from there. And next slide, please. In fact, my wife asked me this evening, since we've never really discussed this, why the United States Marine Corps? It was very clear. I actually went down to a recruiting station on 35th and Fond du Lac. Walked into the recruiting station, and I say there was a gunnery sergeant sitting behind a desk, rather hefty gentleman. He was suffering from what I made a joke about, that he had Dunlap's disease, which means his belly Dunlapped over his belt. That was funny then. Looking in the mirror now, it's not quite as funny. But he was sitting smoking this cigar. He goes, "What can I do for you, son?" And I said, "I'd like to enlist in the Marine Corps under one condition." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "I want to serve in Vietnam." At which time he said, "Back that bus back up, I've got a warm one." But he said, "First thing we have to do is we have to administer the Armed Forces Entrance Exam." Now this is summer of 1964. The Armed Forces Entrance Exam, and he said, "Now I'll help you with your name if you don't know where to put that. I'm going to walk you through this." It was more graphic. It was a picture of a dog, a tank, and a cat. He goes, "Which one doesn't go with the other two?" So I completed my test and I handed it back to him, and he graded it and he goes, "My God, son, you're officer material." But on I went. I sat there, and in no time at all I was on a bus. But I was the guy with 2 years worth of college. So I was going to carry the files of the other 6 guys that were going down to MCRD in San Diego, California. So we got there, flew into San Diego, got on a bus, got to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and I thought, well, I'm a college guy, so we were supposed to get off the bus for this very rude individual, the DI, and I kind of sauntered off the bus, at which time the largest Afro-American gentleman I've ever seen in my life put his size 14 somewhere between my knees and my belly button and suggested I get back on the bus and get off in a hurry and get on the little yellow footprints. So for 12 weeks, they put us through every kind of torture they could think of to bring us down to a level of nothing, from shaving our heads to making us feel like we were truly nothing, and then build us back up as a unit to where we all thought we had an S on our chest. From there, next slide please. After graduation from recruit training, we were bused directly up to Camp Pendleton, to Infantry Training Regiment. We spent 6 weeks up there. I think, yeah, okay, we'll leave it. You can take bring the next one, we'll bring it back if you don't mind. This was my unit there. It's actually on the table on the actual photo of our graduation on January 25th, my mother's birthday, of 1965. After that graduation, it was a special feeling, because going through what we had gone through as a training and knowing where we were going, out of the about 200 people there, 168 of us became very, very close. We were bound as brothers, Marine Corps brothers. And we were taken then from Camp Pendleton on the 25th We arrived in San Diego and boarded ship on the 26th of January, and we set sail on the 27th for Vietnam. Next slide, please. We got over to that area in the South China Sea and wound up spending 33 days on ship without seeing land, just floating. It's the reason anytime we've had a conversation, my wife and I, about a cruise, nah. No. Ship life on the USS Talladega or the Montrose. Now, who are my Navy veterans out there? Okay. You'll understand this. I'll try and explain it, and I apologize for going over it. The USS Montrose and Talladega are what they call APAs. They're personnel carriers. They both used to haul garbage between San Diego and Long Beach. And the Navy swears that they sprayed them out. There's no guarantee of that. But what was unique about it on ship, I was in one of the forward compartments, and they used to have racks that were 8 high from the floor to the ceiling. Now this rack is a rectangular aluminum tubing with some rope on it and a piece of canvas. Now we were Marines, so we didn't get pillows, we just got a blanket. But you had it from the floor to the ceiling with about this much space in between each one. So I got on ship and I go, oh my goodness, I certainly don't want to be up there and be that high and have to climb up there every night, so I'm going to get one of the lower racks. Never realizing that when the ship sways, the top backs sway more, and people get sick up there. You don't want to be on the lower racks. So we changed that in a hurry. After our time floating around the South China Sea, I remember it really clearly. It was Starlight, one of the first operations in 1965 that we were on. We sat there and had a gunnery sergeant that took our platoon into one of the little bays and let us know that we were going in on what they call Papa and Mike boats. I'll explain that in a second. But some of us weren't coming back. And the realization of what we were about to endure really took hold. Now, on these ships, what we had to do, since this is 65, we had to go down cargo nets off the side of the ship into 2 different size carriers that sat there and would do shore landings. So you climbed down with all your rifle, your helmet. We had flak jackets on into these boats and actually did the landings on shore. They were called Papa and Mike boats. If we could go ahead 2, and thank you for being patient with me. Next one, please. This is one of the amphibious landings we did off the USS Talladega. If that looks like a World War II type of thing at Normandy, it was. In fact, some of them I think were the same boats. The next one, please. This is another landing craft off the Point Defiance. Point Defiance had these type of track vehicles that were able to go right up and onto the land. They were like floating coffins, but they got you there and could get you out and float in the water. One more, please. And then the amphibious, when we did the air landings, this little helicopter that's on the other side there, you can't see it very well. For those of you that know something about aviation, these are the old U-34s, an old type helicopter that was around for years and years and years. I loved them because they had a lot of armament on the bottom and kept a lot of us alive. If you could move back a couple then, please. One more. Okay. After that, with Starlight, we probably lost 10 to 15% of everybody that went in. We then did a whole stint of dagger thrust operations. Dagger thrust operations were the same amphibious landings that we'd go in, we'd have objectives, hills, areas, sections that we were to try to secure, engage the enemy, and then when we were done, they'd pull us back out the same way on the ship. We did several of those. We were averaging probably 10 to 15% of the operations losing a lot of personnel, and any of those. So much so that after the dagger thrust operations, they pulled us back out and sent us to the Philippines to do some training and to get replacements from the States. Now, one of the things that you may or may not like to hear, but I'm going to be very honest with you, we were so ill prepared to go into that battle, even with all the training we did at Pendleton. Camp Pendleton in California doesn't look like anything like the jungles of Vietnam. And we were ill prepared and very young, and it was a devastating shock to get in there and realize how ill prepared we were. So losing the troops we did, going back to the Philippines, getting replenishments of new kids with the same faces that we had just months before, still as scared, still as ill prepared. We were the salty guys then, and it was a very difficult time for us and a difficult process of going through. They pulled us out and sent us back in for an operation you might have read about called Harvest Moon. Harvest Moon was the end of November, first or most of December for me in Vietnam. I was born December 20th. It was without question the worst birthday I've ever had in my life. They brought us in by air, one of those that you saw up there as far as how we got in. Military intelligence had told us that it was probably going to be a pretty easy effort to establish our presence there. We were in a tree line, asked to move across the rice paddy group. It took us 72 hours to move 300 yards. The intelligence was wrong, and that happened quite a bit. So after Harvest Moon, we had some options. My particular company went to Phu Bai, and if you can see by the map up here, the area, and I'll move here in just a second, move back, from Phu Bai, which is up here.
Yeah, let it get in the plug.
Okay, thank you. Phu Bai, which is up right below Hue, which is a city right here, to Chu Lai, which I'll be talking about a little later, which is south of Da Nang, is the area of Vietnam that I spent 99% of all my time in. When we got to Phu Bai, we sat there and they said, we have an opportunity for a new company, and it was called the Combined Action Company. Later, it was changed to Combined Action Platoon because, as you know, the military likes to abbreviate everything. And Combined Action Company was CAC, and they found out that was a dirty word in Vietnamese. So they changed it. But as it occurred, there was a gentleman who is one of my longtime heroes now, John J. Mullins. He's in Westmoreland's book, if any of you have ever read that. And he got up on a big Connex box. Connex boxes are those big boxes that they take off ships, they store things in. He got up on that and he had probably 150 Marines in front of him that were going to inquire as to what this new company was going to be. So he gave us our mission and told us what was going to happen. We were in Phu Bai. He says, we're going to divide you up into teams of 8 to 10 Marines. We're going to put you between 5 and 9 miles outside of the compound in Phu Bai. You're going to be working with popular forces, PFs, that live in the village. You're going to get to know the village. You're going to be sitting there and running reconnaissance patrols every day, ambush patrols every night. And if we get hit by a major force, we expect you to phone back the armament, their direction, and hold them up long enough so we can be prepared. But we're not coming out to get you. You find your own way back through our lines. Now, he said, now, if any Marines here want to sit there and not volunteer for this, you won't be thought cowardly. You'll just take one step to the rear and return to your units. And you saw about 75 out of 150 Marines go, hell no. Take one step back. I had more guts than sense at that time, so I stayed. We were divided up. I lived in the village for the better part of, as it turned out, 18 months. The first period was rather short, since this was, again, the end of December. In January, I was on a patrol guiding a company that was doing a sweep through Way on the western side, and we were leading them through an area that had some real hilly, rocky ditches. I mean, they were 30, some of them were 20, 30 feet deep as they went through. So rather than go the 10 miles around, they built rope bridges. And we put a rope bridge across. I had my fire team, which was myself and 3 other individuals, start across the rope bridge, and the vehicle blew out both ends. With something called 57 recoilless rifles. Now, if there's any old, Korea vets or whatever, I didn't even know what that was, and I never saw it this time. I was airborne at the time when this happened. They blew out both ends. I landed stiff-legged in a rock ravine, had dislocated both my knees, one hip, bruised 5 vertebrae in my back, had shrapnel and little pieces of rock in the lower legs, and was hurt. A very important individual, and I'll have a side note here. As you all know, the Marine Corps is the only service that has no medical personnel and no chaplains. We don't have permission to get hurt or die unless they tell us to. But one of the most important people that were with us, 2 actually, and I'll name both of them. One is a Navy corpsman who never bought a drink as long as I was around when we were on liberty, because I wanted him to know my name and made sure that he made house calls if I needed him. And the other one is our chopper pilots, who got us out of so much, so often, and with such a little lifespan that they had. They're my heroes. But the corpsman got down to me, and he took something called an anthropine syringe. Got a needle about this long, and a little tube of toothpaste, what looked like it on the end. And he checked my head, checked my stomach, and said, looked me over, and he says, both legs? He says, I look like a tuning fork. It was down and then out with my legs. So he stuck an anthropine syringe in each of my thighs. It was pure morphine, which helped, which really helped. They got me out of that ditch. They got me to the LZ. They put me on a helicopter. They sent me down to NSA, the Naval Aid Station in Marble Mountain in Da Nang, where we're taken care of. I had already had it in my SRB, that's the service record you carry if you're in the military. That unless I was killed, my father had had a heart condition. At that time, my parents were never to be informed that I had been wounded, which they adhered to. But I spent 3 weeks there, light duty, recuperating. This was now January, so I had been there in country and off the ships for almost a year. And they said, well, you have choices. You can go to Yokosuka, Japan, and then home. You can go to Clark in the Philippines, and then home. Or you can go back to your unit, and they will sit there and release you in accordance with your rotation date, and you can go home. So I said, I want to go back to my unit. So I went back to my unit. We had a first sergeant, who I'll never forget. His name was First Sergeant Brown. First Sergeant Brown was a wonderful individual, one I had a tremendous amount of respect for. He was the first sergeant for Combined Action Company. But he had a physical anomaly. His right eye was 45 degrees as he looked at here. Now you'd think this guy's making fun of somebody with a disability. No, First Sergeant Brown loved it, because you'd go and you go, Sergeant Brown? and he goes, he always had you off balance because you never knew what it was really like looking him straight in the eye. But I took Sergeant Brown and he says, well, you're due in about 30 days for rotation. I said, Staff Sergeant Brown, I want to volunteer for 6 more months. I want to be here because those guys out in the village are my brothers. He went to Captain Mullins, and Captain Mullins agreed, and I signed the waiver that I was going to stay another 6 months. So we continued. At this time, another interesting fact was what weapons that we actually had. Most folks that were in Vietnam with line companies had M14s. We hadn't had the M16s yet. This was too early in the conflict. We in the village did not have that. My TO weapon was a 12-gauge Remington pump, a 45, and something called an M79 grenade launcher. Does anybody remember the old ping pong guns you had as a kid? You'd go boop, and there was no recoil or anything to it. This was a breech-loaded tube about this long with a handle, and the trigger had a projectile about this long. You put it in, you could fire it up to 1,500 yards, and it had a 25-meter kill radius. They were absolutely wonderful weapons. I got very close to Mama-san, who made me, because we didn't have the pouches for them, made me out of wicker. Little pockets. I looked like something out of a Mexican movie where the bandanas were crossed, and that's what I actually wore. Our engagement with the enemy was not at 100 yards or 50 yards. They were close enough that it was us from the tables here in many cases. So typical armament was not appropriate for what we were doing. So we did the night patrols, and we did the daytime patrols. And I like to inject a few things that I found kind of humorous, at least not at the time, but now. One day, since we were on Highway 1 that ran up and down the coast, and part of our job was to protect that highway along with the village. My two were just south of Phu Bai, called Lac Bon and Lac Chon. We sat there and we'd get supply runs from the main reinforced compound. And we sat there and one day get our truckload, and here, jumping off the back, is a brand new second lieutenant. Just buffed. I mean, his gold bars were shiny. He was ready to sit there and do it. He told us he'd been sent out, was going to be our leader in our platoon. We went fine. I think it was the second patrol. This actually happened, I swear, as I'm standing here. Lieutenant Thompson, for some reason, got himself a submachine gun. A Thompson submachine gun that he was very proud of. So we went out on a night patrol, and before about 4 a.m., before the sun came up, we were coming back, and we hear a whistle blow. We were in an ambush type situation where we were stationary. And it was Lieutenant Thompson asking us to assemble around him in the hamlet, where he was standing with Papa-san from one of the huts with a lantern and holding the overlay of our course back to the village, explaining he was going to take a different route. We got back to the village, and Sergeant Martinez, who became a very close friend, and I asked to take the run back into the reinforced compound, which we were able to do. We could get showers and get shaves and haircuts and so forth. We went to see First Sergeant Brown. First Sergeant Brown, we got to tell you, a bad accident's going to happen to Lieutenant Thompson if he's out there tomorrow. You got to do something for us. And First Sergeant Brown had no sense of humor either. We had to explain ourselves. He immediately went in to see Captain Mullins, and the truck took us back out with supplies, and they had phoned ahead. Lieutenant Thompson was coming back in. One of the other things that was unique about living in the village, and my experience in Vietnam, and I think a lot of experience for some of the people that have been in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places after us, was not being able to distinguish between the enemy and the friend. They all look alike, but they weren't. One day we went in and for showers and shaves, and at that time they had some of the Vietnamese personnel in the reinforced compound in the PX and other things, and you could get a shave. And these were the old-time shaves. I know you folks look a pretty young audience, but we used to get straight razor shaves. They would take a straight razor. If you've ever had a straight razor shave, it's really, really close and very good. So I went in and got my shave and felt great, got a shower, got a haircut, got back out to the Ville, and that night we were probed, which we often were in the village itself, with small arms fire. And you'd return that fire, and you'd sit there and the next morning go out and see if you had hit anything and you got any of the probers. And sure enough, the next morning we were out there and counting up the bodies, and there was the barber. The same guy who had given me a straight edge razor shave the day before was a Viet Cong and was out there shooting us that night. So that was a unique experience which taught a lot of lessons and gave us the ability to sit there and be very cautious, very diplomatic about how we handled people. They also, besides the Viet Cong, which this was their home turf, and the North Vietnamese Army, which was very well prepared and very diligent about their efforts. We also had the ARVON. ARVON were South Vietnamese Army troops. The only problem was, if you got into a situation and were engaged with the enemy, they kind of decided they'd go with whoever was winning. And we had to watch that very carefully too. They weren't dedicated, and this brings me to a point that I don't want to make political, but I think it's worth saying in context of my journey. You have to realize that the people that we were there fighting against and the people that we were fighting with had decades and decades, their whole lifetime of war. First the French as part of the French triumvirate, then the Japanese, and then the Americans. And for the basic point, and I will reference some reference material that I've left on the tables, there was a PBS 10-part series in 2017. If you haven't seen it, it's the only movie I've ever seen on Vietnam, and probably the only movie I ever will. But it explains the simple fact that really, whether you're North or South Vietnam, what these people, the only thing they really wanted was to be Vietnam. They didn't want any of us in there. And we have to learn a lesson from that. So the ARVON was not necessarily our greatest ally. If you could move that ahead a couple then, please. Okay. One more, please. Okay. I spent the rest of my time in the village. We lost a lot of brothers, and I consider the gentlemen or ladies in this room, if they're Marines, they're my brothers, and they always will be. The Marine Corps trains you very well, physically, for combat. What they train, and what I think distinguishes the Marine Corps, is they train you to react and not to think. I cannot tell you how many times that situations occurred that I moved, changed the field of fire, acted in a certain way, and had no realization why I did that impulsively. It was because of that training, that beating it into you, that you react a certain way in certain situations, that everybody had each other's back, that allows you to sit there and survive a combat situation. Nothing prepares you mentally or emotionally for combat. I keep on saying all military service is honorable. The only thing that differentiates us is the experiences that we've had. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. One of the questions, since I also do some lectures for middle school and high school students, and they find out I was in Vietnam, and invariably the question that's asked is, were you ever afraid? And I make it very, very clear. 24/7/365. The reason I'm talking to you tonight is because I have been as afraid as any human being could ever be. Afraid to the point where the tears in your eyes and the knees close enough that you were afraid they're knocking when you were in an ambush set up. You were afraid of giving it away. Yes, I've been afraid. I can no longer be afraid for myself. I can be afraid for my wife, my kids, for you. But yes, fear was very much part of it. Then I'm often also asked, what was your greatest fear while you were over there? And to be totally honest with you, my greatest fear was the last 90 days that I was in Vietnam. And the reason that was my greatest fear is because I started to enjoy it. I sat there and fought to be in every action all the time. Wasn't afraid then. Looking back on it, that scares me to death even to this day. I'll give you an example. The 2 days before we were due to rotate out, Marty Martinez and myself, my sergeant, they were pulling us back a week before we were supposed to rotate because too many kids were coming to the last day and getting killed, and a lot of parents were writing letters to senators and so forth. So we were back in the reinforced compound over the radio that Lac Chon was being probed by heavy fire. This was 5 miles out of the compound. We were not allowed or supposed to go anywhere near anything combative at that time. Marty, who was even goofier than I was at the time, said, let's go. We got to go out. That's our Ville. So we jumped in something called a Mighty Mite, which is like a mini Jeep, and tore down Highway 1, no lights, pitch black, dark. Picked up a couple of guys from Lac Bon who jumped on with us and got into the action. We got there, fended off the probe. Marty took 2 rounds, 2 carbine rounds, right through the meat underneath his shoulders, one on each side. We got him back to the compound. First Sergeant Brown took a bigger chunk out of my butt because I hadn't gotten shot than he did Marty's, but he was not happy with us. We got choppered down to Da Nang on the same chopper. Marty went to, I think, Akusta, Japan. I went to Camp Hansen in Okinawa. And then on September 11th, 1966, landed at Norton Air Force Base, which I think is in San Bernardino. I think that's the town it's in California. Got off the plane, got down on my knees, kissed that stupid cement, and I was back in the world. Next slide, please. Found out I was going to be stationed at Marine Barracks, Brooklyn, New York, the U.S. Naval Station. Went there, and as they were trying to figure out what to do with me, in walks this gentleman, a lieutenant colonel who was just the picture of a Marine poster child. He was huge, bald head, looked like he was one throbbing muscle. Walked in, and being the old school Marine that I was, I called the entire office to attention. He walked up to me and he goes, "And your name is, sir?" And I said, at that time, Corporal James Councillor. He says, "I'm Lieutenant Francis Wilford Teef, Jr. Can you take me to your commanding officer?" Which I did. Now, first of all, I knew right away, if you name your son Francis Wilford Teef, Jr., you're either going to get picked on or you're going to be one bad dude. And he was a bad dude. But he became from that time on, my mentor. For whatever reason, he liked me. It's possible that what he liked best was that I would volunteer for any duty that he came up with. We had what they call KIA calls, which means that you and another Marine officer and a Navy chaplain would go out to houses and inform parents that their son had been killed in action. We did funeral escorts, which means at a funeral cadence, walking behind a hearse through neighborhoods where you were not going to be popular, were one of losing one of their own. We did parades down Fifth Avenue where we were thrown eggs at, spit on, since we were not heroes of World War II. We were baby killers coming home. Colonel Teef had one of the greatest lines in the world. He goes, at that time I had made meritorious sergeant. He said, "Sergeant, you're going to have the color guard down Fifth Avenue, and you do not break ranks, whatever happens, but if they try and go after my flag or the American flag, and you order one of the guards on either side of you to have the butt of their gun reach the center of their forehead, I will be your attorney." And he was dead serious because it was that type of support. He also gave me two very important opportunities. He gave me the opportunity to go to school while I was still there, nights, Saturdays, Sundays, through the USAFE, which is the program, the United States Armed Forces Educational Extension. It was actually administered by the University of Maryland. Allowed me to finish my degree. Business administration, you had to have something that was military bound, so I had a minor in computer science. He also gave me another opportunity, asked for volunteers, here I was, to sit there and work a special project. You became the greatest title I've had in my whole life on any resume. I was a naval attaché to the United Nations. Now, doesn't that sound impressive? I was a mailman. We were couriers. We would, they gave us civilian clothes. We were trained with 38s. Well, when our number was called, they'd pick us up in a staff car, those little green or black cars, sedans, and they would take you either to the UN, to the U.S. consulate, or down to Washington if we had to go there. And you would go in, they would cuff a attaché case to your left wrist. You were taken out to the airport, not through the normal passenger route, but you know the little stairs just before you get on the plane where they take all the garbage and so forth and they put it down the chute? Up those stairs, onto the plane, always had a window seat nobody next to you. The guy would stand there till they were ready to shut the door. You had to take your .38 and put it in an envelope and give it to the pilot. Why they made us take our .38s and give it to the pilot, I have no idea, because I'm sure he didn't know what to do with it. But we had to do that. They would stand there till the door closed. You flew to wherever you were going, and you would sit there and reverse the process. You couldn't get off the plane until the Marine embassy people got there, and the guard. They would take you off the plane, down the stairs by the chute, in the car to the embassy, take that one off and put another one on and reverse the whole process. Now, one of the benefits that you got out of this, if it was a benefit, is I had to have a top secret clearance, what they call a crypto clearance, because we had components that we were taking with us to the embassies for the cryptographic gears, and they're machines, they wear out. Components had to be transposed. These are top secret components. The only other benefit you got is if you had no return, you got 72 hours in whatever destination you were going. I got a few of those. But we did that as a sideline to all the other stuff that we were doing. So upon completion of my degree, my mentor, at this time he was a full colonel, and you can look him up. He became a brigadier general, Francis Wilford Teef Jr. He died in 2016. He said, I want to try and get an appointment to officer candidate school for you, which he did. And I went through officer candidate school in Quantico, Virginia. I came out after graduation as a second lieutenant. I sat there and rose very quickly through the ranks because I had been assigned to something brand new for the Marine Corps. It was called electronic data processing. Ooh, that was a biggie. Nobody knew what that was. I got to meet some tremendous people. Admiral Hopper was her name. She was one of the legends, a naval admiral, created languages like COBOL, individuals that were just sensational. A lot of training, and of course, once we were trained, back to Westpac. Westpac is the Asia Pacific area covered by the United States Marine Corps. We were there to build data processing installations all over Southeast Asia. I was given the opportunity to go into camps. I'll use the example of Camp Hague, Quonset Hut Hague in Okinawa. I don't know if you know what a Quonset hut is. It's corrugated steel, and they're kind of rounded.
Like the ATF?
Yes, you know. But it sometimes had a cement floor, sometimes not. And here I was a brand new second, then first lieutenant, with the assignment of big budget and building a data processing installation. Getting experience that I could have never gotten in the civilian world. Hardware software vendor analysis, security disaster control planning, human resource allocation planning and operations. Nobody would have given me those opportunities in the civilian world, yet the Marine Corps did. And as a result of that, they sat there and gave me a 40-year career in technology with companies like KPMG, Oracle Corporation, and the last couple of years with Adobe Marketo before I retired 7 years ago now. 8, you keep on stretching it. They gave me other things. They gave me the last 2 years of college. They gave me a brotherhood. Next year I'll have been a United States Marine for 60 years. Next slide, please. I think it's fitting. And that, you can go to the next one too. Once a Marine, always a Marine. If you go outside here and look at the one of the cars parked very close to the building here, you'll notice that's on my license plates. And it's true. You develop a work ethic. You develop a brotherhood that is something special. There was a young man that graduated from Homestead High School. He's the brother of a best friend of my son, who came to me a couple of years ago and said, doing okay on time? I know you were looking. No, I saw you. He said, called me up and said, Mr. Counselor, I'm thinking of joining the Marine Corps. And I said, certainly, Jacob. Come on over, we'll sit down, and I'll see if I want you in my Marine Corps. Because that's the way we feel about the Corps. He now is, by the way, on an expert. In fact, his dad's here in the audience. Where are you, Mark? Raise your hand. Where's Mark Zupke? Is he back there someplace? All right. He is the poster board Marine. He's now Sergeant Jacob Zupke within 4 years. He is on the elite marksmanship and shooting team for the Marine Corps, and on the elite team for all armed forces competing internationally. He is very proud, and even though there's 56 years difference in our age, he's my brother. They gave me one other thing. Intern, next one. PTSD. If any of you have any doubts, I will tell you point blank that anybody who serves in a combat situation and sees man's inhumanity to man comes back with a degree of PTSD. Some of us handle it better than others. Some of it's more intense. You can go to the next slide. My personal journey included the disabilities that I had as a result as I got older. I've had 2 operations on Achilles, or 2 torn Achilles tendons. I've got 2 total knee replacements. I've got 2 hernia surgeries. I've had 2 major back surgeries, L3, L4, and L5 are shot. I've had a tear in the shoulder. I'm 95% deaf in this ear and 50% deaf in this ear. I have hearing aids that are Bluetoothed that go across, so when you're talking to me on this side, I hear you over here. My wife keeps on saying they could have shortchanged it and just gone straight through. It has saved some time. Plenty of room there. I've lost 60% of my sight in this in my eye. Can't find First Sergeant Brown. We'd have got along fine now. But my hair for a 77-year-old really looks good, doesn't it? All right. All right. But what is the most difficult thing that I've gone through with those, and I still play golf thanks to my brother-in-law here, who makes sure I don't lose a dozen balls every round by being my partner, are the unseen wounds that I'm very acutely aware of. Hiding the issues, constant flashbacks, sleepless nights waking up in pools of sweat that were big enough that they drained right into the mattresses, guilt in bad decisions, 2 failed marriages, all of which the lack of trust, haunted by actions, reactions, and one big question. Out of 168 of those Marines, the picture being over there on the table that I graduated from ITR with, 34 of us came back alive. Why me? I still ask myself that question. Finding a support to help deal with the cause and effect. Well, mine was rather unique. After 2 failed marriages, I met this lady who was working at Le Club, a sports club in Glendale. Fell in love, got married, but she was a little different. She goes, "You're not going to lie to me. You're not going to sit there and not keep things from me. You're going to trust me, and I'm going to be with you for the rest of our lives." or this marriage won't work. First Sergeant Brown had nothing on her. We'll be married 36 years next April. So it's called finding the support that's needed to sit there and live through PTSD. Because you don't get over it, you sit there and learn to live through it. Now, I'd like to make one thing clear before I get into what really drives me today and conclude this presentation. I'm not a hero by any stretch of the imagination. But I know 134 brothers whose names are on a wall at the Vietnam Memorial, and they're my heroes. So I just want to make that position very clear. So what drives me today, because of the experience I've had, and I'll read this because it's something I wrote for a interview I was doing on a cable network a few weeks ago. As Veterans Affairs Committee Chairman for the local Thiensville-Mequon Rotary Chapter, we, along with Veterans Administration, the Milwaukee War Memorial, and other veterans and corporate organizations, are committed to supporting the efforts of the Southeastern Wisconsin Suicide Prevention Task Force for Veterans, providing resource information and services to individuals needing a network of support as they deal with the invisible wounds of war. A fact that startled me and drove me to this is in 2022, 27 veterans committed suicide in Ozaukee County. Now, Ozaukee County, most of you would not be surprised that Ozaukee County, where we live, is the most affluent county in the state of Wisconsin. What you may not know is it's also the 25th most affluent county in the country. What does that tell us? That the invisible wounds of war are not bound by economics, by race, by geographic location. They're anywhere. This is a crisis that is in desperate need of comprehensive support and services for veterans. We have a system of assistance through the VA to support veterans and individuals in needs, but that is grossly underfunded. I have gone out and I never sat there and went through the VA for anything. I'm now 100% disabled according to the VA, but it took me 10 years to go through that process with them. You cannot deal with the VA without a sponsor, whether it be American Legion, whether it be VFW, you need someone. It's very difficult. They do a great job. If they're TO'd staffed to the maximum of their employees at the VA hospital on National, out by the ballpark, they can service 900 veterans a day. There's times they see 2,000 veterans a day. They're that understaffed. They do a great job on everything. In our society in general, we still view mental or emotional issues with a stigma of weakness instead of medical conditions of which they are. Whether it be in the service or whether it be in corporate world, if you admit that you have a mental issues or emotional issues that you need addressed, your career could easily be over because the stigma is still there, certainly still in the services. So what can we do? We can get involved, all of you, and that's what I'm here asking for and why I agreed to do this in the first place. Support your local VA, veterans organizations, other nonprofit organizations and groups providing services for veterans. If you know an individual that's struggling with mental or emotional crisis, support and encourage them to get help. I've left some things on the tables. I didn't have enough My printer ran out. But there's 3 documents there. One is kind of the history of our Rotary chapter. We welcome any of you that would like to sit there and participate in Rotary, which is a wonderful organization. They've given me the platform, the springboard, through the Veterans Affairs Committee to do some of the work that we're doing right now. Working with music for therapy for veterans, so they have something to turn to at 3 o'clock in the morning other than a pistol. There's a whole array of service before selves opportunity at the Thiensville-Mequon Rotary in our chapter. We have a whole bunch of Rotary, my fellow Rotarians here tonight. Sandy Custer, Colonel Custer. He never reminds me that he always outranked me, and he still will. But the people in Rotary are a fine group and welcome new members to that organization. The other sheets that are on there that were on your tables are one, the background on the Southeast Wisconsin Suicide Prevention Task Force, and a lady named Donna Drew with her number on there. If you feel like volunteering, we're not looking for money. We're feeling that if you feel like volunteering, it's a wonderful thing to sit there and have and get involved in. The other one is a couple of reference sheets. One is on that PBS series that I mentioned, if you want to really get even more information on Vietnam. And the other one is on a book, the only one that I've ever read that made sense on Vietnam, called The Matterhorn, which was written by a Marine after about 28 years. So it would be a suggestion, if you want to sit there and learn more about Vietnam, to do that. I'll wrap this up by saying thank you. Thank you for listening to my journey, my story. This is the first time I've ever done it. It may be the last time, but I appreciate you listening and staying with me. Thank you all.
Jim, we're going to have a...
Yeah, sure. We'll do Q&A.
We're going to have a question and answer period. We're going to take the microphone out, but I got a question for you. Your severe injury, how long did it take you to recover over there? Did they send you back into the field after that, or what was your experience with your Purple Heart?
They wanted me on light duty for, they wanted me on light duty for like anywhere from 30 to 45 days. After 3 weeks, I was going crazy and begged to go back and get with my brothers in the village. So it didn't take as long as it was supposed to, but that was my choice.
Next one. Do you keep in touch with any of the survivors from your unit?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It's a very interesting question, and glad you asked. Jenny knows what I'm going to say here. 34 of us, there are about 13 or 14 of us that are still alive that came back from that. We lost one a few weeks ago. Satch Brandano was out there in the village with me. He had a brain tumor, cancer. Before, in fact, yesterday, as I was going through this particular preparation, I phoned the wife of a very good friend out in California and spoke with her, because her husband went through a lot more than I even went through, and she understood what I was talking about. It's very difficult to sit down with people and explain to them what you have gone through, and it's just so hugely important to find people who do understand and have been there and done that to be able to communicate with. So I try my best.
We often have the wife of our speaker come and say a few words. It's often meaningful for ladies. Mrs. Councillor, will you come up and take the microphone and share what you would like? Go right to the microphone. Anything as the wife of Jim.
Now be kind.
I'll try, dear. Hi, I'm Jenny Councillor. As Jim mentioned, we've been married for 35 years. Regarding his experience in Vietnam, he has been pretty open with me about sharing things and what happened over there. But he doesn't speak to groups very often, probably never about it, so that this is a unique experience for him. As he also mentioned, it was difficult in the beginning of our marriage because he hid things from me and had to kind of nip that in the bud before it got out of hand. But, you know, obviously we progressed, we worked through it.
I'm still a work in process.
Kind of he is. He still struggles sometimes, I think. And I'm there to remind him. But, you know, it's as with any marriage, as you know, it has its ups and downs. And, you know, we continue to work through it.
All right, any other questions from anybody?
Oh man, first question. Hi, I'm Caitlin Steinberg. I wanted to thank you for your courage and vulnerability and speaking publicly for the first time. I work with oral history and veterans telling their own story, and that must have been a challenge, and I think you did it incredibly well.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask you a question about the transition from entering your service as a boy and leaving as a man. And this is something I love to ask veterans. Do you remember a moment during combat or your service in Vietnam where you were first conscious of the fact that the boy who joined the Marine Corps, who wanted to see the excitement, that boy was gone and a man has taken his place?
I truly wish you hadn't asked that question. And I know why you did, and I appreciate that. I will answer that as honestly as possible. When we came off the ship for the first time, I had real reservations. I was a Wisconsin boy who had been to Wisconsin, through Illinois, Indiana, and in a little farm community in Ohio and no place else as a kid. I had never fired a weapon before I went in the Marine Corps. That's why I think I could sit there and qualify as high as I did, because I just did it their way. But as we came off the ship, one of the things that was haunting me as a boy was whether I could pull the trigger on another human being. It's not something that happens lightly. As a very good friend laid in my arm dying in a rice paddy, that went away. And so did my idealism, and so did my boyhood.
Stan.
Thank you so much, and may God bless you for all you've done. I think one tends to not think about the ramifications or ripple effect that your service and those who have gone, who have also contributed in this way, has on the family. And I'm just wondering if you would want to share anything about, like, if you have children and how they came out of this, and of course your wife, and we talked about a couple of marriages, and so I just would like you to expound on that a little bit, if you would, please.
Yeah, my first marriage was to a Navy wave who was assigned to work for me at Marine Barracks Brooklyn, and after 2 weeks asked to be reassigned because I was such a son of a bitch. My idea was, of course, she thought that of me, I had to date her immediately. We wound up getting married, having 2 children. I went back overseas a lot. I was gone a lot, traveling. Military life is not an easy life, period, for a family. It takes a certain amount of strength not just in the individual person in the armed forces, but with a strong support system of a wife that can sit there and take on an additional burden of raising children. It is difficult on a marriage. It is difficult on the children with their father being away. It is something that you volunteer to do. You know you're getting into it. It's something we don't appreciate with our service personnel. One of the things that really irritates me is 27% of all military families are on food stamps. That's a fact, folks. 27% of all military families are on food stamps while they're willing to give their lives for their countries. If that explains to you how difficult it is and the ramifications of being a military family, that's as good as I can say it.
Jim, I have another question, then we're going to ask you to conclude, but the question is this. Do you think that war could have been won at any juncture that we were over there? What's your thoughts? Often different Vietnam veterans have opinions on that. How, now looking back over 50 years, what are your thoughts on that?
Boy, you're right up there with that young lady over there on questions I wish she'd never asked. But it's an honest question, and I'll give you an honest answer. That war was never meant to be won. First of all, as you heard me sit there and say, the people that were fighting with us, the people we were fighting against, neither one of them really wanted us in there. They just wanted to be Vietnam. They didn't want to be communists. They didn't want to be French. They didn't want to be Chinese. Ho Chi Minh, who was the symbol of everything we hated while we were over there, asked for our help years and years before, and we turned them down. That turned in, and when I mentioned the loss of idealism, that's the core of that. It became a political fiasco of graft. I cannot tell you how many times we went into a country which is the size of New Jersey, and we took hills just to sit there and be withdrawn, and the enemy came back up, and then we'd go back up and take them again. It was not a well executed war, and one that we should have won. We didn't win, and we should have never fought.
Jim, in a moment I'm going to ask you for concluding comments. You have a room full of people here, and each veteran gives his final thoughts and comments as we close. But first, Paul Radke, when you come here, many of you don't know Paul. Tell us who you are and about some of the things that have changed since Ferrante's left.
Yeah, obviously most of you know we've got a new caterers this year, so things are a little different. I mentioned it last month, I'll mention it again. Our reservations are really critical now because we have to have an exact count, so if you're used to coming and you're not used to signing up, make sure you talk to Ken or myself before you leave and find a way that you can let us know whether you're coming or not so you get that exact number. The reason a lot of you don't see me here, I think most of you know, during COVID I double booked myself and joined the Seaford Light and Water Commission. We meet the third Monday every month. So I'm here at the beginning, help Ken get the show going. I got to leave, then I'm back here at the end. So that's why you may not see me very often.
Tell them your responsibilities.
Yeah, my responsibilities are usually helping with the technology, getting the presentation up and going. Work with Ken a week prior, getting the emails printed out, or the mail letters printed out, and then I also send out all the emails as well. So that's what I do.
Two quick thoughts wrapping up.
Yes, sir, as we conclude.
One, as I talk to kids, I leave them with one request. They say, what can we do? It's not just Veterans Day. I keep on telling them it's 5 simple words. When you see a veteran, when you see a serviceman, thank you for your service. That's all you have to say. It's hugely meaningful. And because of organizations like this, and Ken, you've got a wonderful organization here, this turnout is incredible. And I'm so appreciative of having this type of audience to share my journey with. But you remember the kids that are in the service today are the military history of tomorrow that organizations like this will be studying. So please let's support our active duty forces as they work with our allies and friends and protect us, giving us the rights you have today to be sitting here and enjoying the freedoms that we enjoy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Very nice. Thank you.